All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call our regular meeting of council for July 21st to order. And the first item of business is the adoption of the minutes of the public hearing held July 7th, 2014. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any errors, omissions, changes? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Now I'm looking for a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of the council meeting held July 7th, 2014. Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Powell. Again, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We're now moving to approve the agenda. There is a change in tonight's agenda, and I'm referring to item 5F, which is regarding the unsightly properties located at 150, 154, 158, 162, 166, 70, 74, 78, 82, and 186 Skylark Avenue to be removed from the agenda, and that the agenda be approved as amended. And the reason, of course, is that those properties are brought into compliance. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We did have one presentation scheduled for tonight for a long-term service award, but I understand the gentleman is unavailable, and so we are going to skip over that. We will bring that to you at a later time. And now moving right into our delegations, ladies and gentlemen, we do have 3 delegations this evening, the first of which is a delegation from the Arrowsmith Search and Rescue Group. And I see you gentlemen are right there. You're going to give us a program update and a request for support. So if you wouldn't mind, please feel free to come forward and have a seat at the table. So we normally allow 10 minutes for a presentation and then some time for council to ask questions as well. And the floor is yours.
Sure thing. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nick Rivers. I'm the president of Arrowsmith Search and Rescue. To my right here is Greg Field, puts in countless hours with our organization for all sorts of fundraising, society work, and a huge amount of operational work. Arrowsmith Search and Rescue is currently doing a couple different projects in town. We are doing an expansion to our existing rescue hall to get some additional space for training, for storing rescue and life-saving equipment. We are also working on adding a rescue vehicle to our fleet due to the existing one we have is right basically at its limits. It's too small for us. It's not going where we need it to. We're struggling to keep up. A lot of stuff's having to come out and go in personal vehicles, and then members of the public are having to, of our organization, are having to take it into rescue scene for us. So basically, our group, I did a little bit of a synopsis over the last, since 2006 until now. We've had 245 calls, put in 12,687 hours of search and rescue actual tasking time. And that is looking for and rescuing individuals of this community from Parksville, Qualicum, all of School District 69, and anybody else who might get injured or lost in any of the areas around this area. I would say on average about half of our call volume is in town. The other half is out in the bush. A lot of those calls, I shouldn't say a lot of them, some of those calls we do are mutual aid to groups from all over Vancouver Island and British Columbia. I've personally been called out. I haven't responded, but I have been called out everywhere from the Queen Charlottes down the entire Vancouver Island, all over Vancouver. So we're quite busy with that. This year we put on a ground search and rescue member course, which is 6 months long. We put 15 people through it, and we put over 3,000 hours of instructional time and the students' time into that course, all volunteer. There's nobody in our organization that receives any funding for personal gain of any kind. Our group right now is funded through fundraising efforts, a lot due to the man sitting right beside me. Puts in a huge amount of time into what our fundraising for our group, along with many others in our organization. We do try to get some grants in here and there where we can. I don't know if you can speak to how many hours you put into fundraising, but lots, hundreds of hours on top of everybody's regular life. And the other way we receive any funding is any of our tasks Emergency Management in British Columbia will reimburse expenses that we come up on our tasks. So we have to be able to front any funds, and that usually comes out of our members' pockets. Anything on task that we need, our members pay for, submit the receipts. Those receipts go down to Emergency Management British Columbia, and they refund us for them. So we don't have any sort of stable funding. We don't have any source of reliable income. A lot of it is based on how many calls we get in a year, which can vary anywhere from 15 to 50. It's depending on the year, depends on how much money we're going to have. Makes it very hard for us to have any sort of plan because we have no stable source of any income coming in. So that makes things very difficult. Training aids, the amount of training we do. I've got a book beside me here, a binder, a bag, I should say. The amount of training required to the level that I'm at right now, and I've still got 2 or 3 more books to add to that. So the funding for this, for our members, a lot of it has to happen outside of our area, and it's not anything we can fund because we don't have the funding to do that. So all of our members that go for training, say for search management courses, they're in New Westminster for 4 days. That's all on them. They have to pay for that, all that kind of stuff. Life-saving gear, all that kind of, there's a lot of gear that we have to purchase and replace because it expires. All of our rescue ropes expire, our helmets expire, automatic external defibrillator batteries, it goes on and on. They all expire. Stuff that we rely on for saving lives on a regular basis, and it's really hard to plan for funds in order to replace that stuff so we can keep providing the service we can without stable funding. We're talking of approximate $15,000 to $20,000 a year is what our operational side for the society needs to run for insuring our equipment. Currently, we're insuring about $250,000 of equipment right now. That's not including our vehicles. So it's kind of why we're here. We're doing up a different project, the hall expansion, the different trucks. We don't, a place to store it because again, the hall right now doesn't have anywhere to fit a second vehicle, but we really desperately need it. And talk about maybe any kind of sustainable funding for the organization. Well, if anybody's got any questions.
All right, very good. So I will open the floor to members of council. Should you have any questions or comments? Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for all the good work that you do. Where do you get how much funding do you get now, and where do you get it from? And I gather it's not stable, but relatively speaking, is it something that you get on an annual basis from the same sources?
No, I'll touch on it a little bit, but I'm going to let Greg field this one mostly. We don't really, we have places that we apply to yearly and things like that, but we don't have at this time anywhere that we can guarantee any amount of money from it any year. But I will pass it off to Greg here quickly, and he can touch on that too.
The key is the stable funding from our point of view. And I guess I'll take the term operational expenses and divide it into 2 parts, overhead and then the remainder. The remainder would be things like tasks, where we're out and we're spending money on stuff. That is reimbursed by EMBC on a per task basis. Their reimbursement program is generous. They do their best to fund the search and rescue groups. They do their best to keep supporting us. However, it is on a task basis. Our overhead, that other part of our operational expenses, is, like as Nick said, $15,000 to $20,000 a year, insurance, fees, everything else. If we do nothing in a year, that we have to come up with that money. Now, if we have no tasks in a given year or a very poor year in terms of tasks or the way they're reimbursed, then we could be in trouble for that $15,000 to $20,000. That's what we're trying to explore, is ways to come up with that money being a stable source of thing, a stable source for us, that we know it's going to be there. We do, if we do have money, we like to keep it aside if we could to make sure that we can operate next year. But then if we keep that money aside, right now we're trying to raise approximately another $40,000 for our new equipment truck. and roughly $60,000 for an addition to the hall, or possibly somewhere to store this new equipment truck, as our hall is too small to store it. It's unfortunately too high. So, as I said, we're looking for a stable source of funding. I guess if maybe a poor comparison to your fire department, but suppose your fire department only did 90% of the calls this year. Would you drop their funding by 10%? You see, that's what happens to us, and that's where we get concerned. We're trying to make that part stable.
Yeah, no, I mean, to make that comparison, our fire department has long-term capital plans. We have all sorts of things in place to ensure its longevity and its effectiveness, right? So it is a good comparison to make, and you folks are in a difficult situation. Certainly if you're looking to expand and looking to bring a better level of service to us, and not having that solid ongoing funding. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's one thing that we work hard with, is to try and bring as much support to the community as we can. We offer hug-a-tree programs for children, which is children education that we do through the schools, teaching them, if you get lost, here's what to do, supplying them with supplies through the Hug-a-Tree and Adventure Smart programs. And we also offer the Project Lifesaver, which is something that's fairly new coming to the community, which is something that you can wear similar to like the Lifeline buttons. It's a little bracelet you wear that emits a radio frequency that for anyone with a cognitive issue for wandering, we can then have a way easier time trying to locate these individuals. So we can track the radio frequency and pinpoint where they are. So that's another thing that we're implementing in the community to make things better and save lives.
Yeah, very good. Other members of council, okay, we'll start with, I think, Councillor Morrison first, then Councillor Neufeld, then Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation. Obviously, the work that you guys do around here is invaluable, especially given the surrounding that we have. Do you have an idea? Obviously, I would assume that you're approaching the other areas, RDN and Qualicum. Do you have an idea of what you're looking for? Obviously, a budget line item that you can bank on each year. Do you have a dollar value in mind of what you'd like to get from each of the areas?
Yeah, actually, Greg is heavily involved in making up the budget at Small. Ask him if he can field that one.
This fixed overhead, is that the term that, hopefully correct term, and we're not financial people, but that's the money that we have to see that has to go out no matter what we do, or if we do nothing. And again, my figures may be incorrect, but I understand there's in our area, including Parksville, Qualicum, those parts of the RDN that are within our operating area, which is would be bounded by Comox, SAR, Nanaimo SAR, and Alberni SAR, but we're in that area, is about 44,000 people, which I guess translates to 20,000 households. So we've been using a rough number of $15,000, so that sort of works out to $1 a household per year. And that would take off that piece. We're reasonably happy to go after funding for projects. And we are successful with the Gaming Commission. And certainly, I mean, I'm an expert on filling out grant applications. And there's an awful lot of them that say we don't fund overhead expenses.
Right. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And this will probably sound somewhat redundant, but we had a discussion last night, Greg, and went over some of it. And as far as your operating is concerned, you're looking for a certain dollar figure, say $1 a household or something like that. As far as your capital, though, what are we looking for? Are you doing? Well, how do you raise your money as far as the truck that you require and the ability to house that truck and that type of thing? Where is that money coming from, and what are the dollar values that we're talking about there?
Well, in terms of that one, we've received some money from some of the service clubs. They're reliable. They certainly say between 5 or 6 service clubs are able to get approximately that many thousands of dollars. The RDN grant and aid program was quite generous to us this year. We got a $5,000 grant from them. A lot of a lot of, like TELUS is a big company in our area. You know, we may or may not be eligible for their larger grant program, which could be up to $20,000. They have a smaller one, which is $5,000. Then unfortunately we don't have, you know, any large industrial people in, you know, companies in our area. And they actually, I saw one, oh gosh, well, say Kitimat, they're, the Alcan mill up there, they'll fund that group. You know, so we don't have that kind of industrial base for people that are willing to help, you know, willing to work that way. So, but then again, the Gaming Commission, that's our big source. And they are willing to help, you know, they've been good to search and rescue groups, I have to admit that.
Yeah, so just to clarify one thing there too, yeah, most for our projects, things like that, a lot of what we do is grants and applying for things. We do, you know, with the sandcastles, things like that, that's always a great thing to be involved with. It's the problem where we're struggling to find is the term we've been using tonight, which is overhead, being our equipment insurances, our vehicle insurances, keeping the lights on in the hall, phone bills, pager bills, all that kind of thing is really hard to get grants for. That's one of the hardest things that we find to get funding for is just keeping the operation alive year to year with our regular overhead or expenses that it takes just to keep the doors open.
Makes sense. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to go back to Councillor Morrison's question about, so you're going to go to the RDN, I'm assuming, Qualicum Beach and here, so between 15 and 20,000, you're going to ask each community or each partner for $6,000 a year?
The number the way I've been looking at it is $1 per household.
Okay.
You know, however that breaks out. And
so whatever population we have in Parksville, $1 for each household?
Yeah.
And
more
that's
or
how
less.
you're going to divide it up?
With apologies, I don't know if that's the proper model to be even discussing in terms of the way it is. But that's, you know, from what I've been involved with before, and I pay taxes, you know, your assessment houses or something like that, or a parcel tax. And
so most of your rescues, are they in the city of Parksville or are they out in the bush?
Well, you know, if you look at how much, you know, Parksville is there's a lot of people in it, but we spend, you know, we're after, there was, but actually he has the numbers.
Yeah, so basically what we've done is, I would say half of our calls are in town. Now, that being in town is in town within our areas, Parksville or Qualicum. And then the other half of them would be split between mutual aid calls to other organizations, and those might be in their municipalities. They also might be asking for any specialized gear that we might have. We have been lucky enough to get ourselves some really high-tech underwater cameras and things like that, and we go to other search and rescue groups on the island to use those tools. So any calls that we get are either in the city, or typically looking for the people in the city that have left the city and can't get back to it. So that's kind of what we do.
And so do you have your overhead for this year?
This year, basically what we've done is we have made it policy in our organization to ensure that we have overhead to run every year. Now, we will get that overhead and make sure we can stay afloat. That might mean that we don't grow at all, we don't get any equipment, we don't get anybody trained, and we can't do anything but basically stay idle. So at this time, we are so far be able to do that, but that puts us $15,000 to $20,000 away from replacing our equipment truck. So yes, we have the fund, we are able to keep the doors open right now, but we are unable to continue to grow where we need to.
So, you know, it's interesting because recently we went through something a little bit similar in the sense that it was becoming a problem with our community policing services. Same kind of thing. Obviously, they provide a valuable service, probably save us taxpayers a lot of money, quite frankly, because they're volunteers. But we're constantly fundraising just to maintain themselves and, you know, spending all your time with bake sales as opposed to getting out in the field and doing things like that.
Yeah.
And I think we were able to successfully, through the regional district, secure a line item in effect in their budget to provide them with some stabilized funding annually. Certainly not as much as they ultimately need, but it gives them that basic amount. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you folks. It'd be wonderful to have that amount, say it's $15,000 a year, that you know that you can rely upon, and then go out and make your applications for the new truck and the new fire hall expansion and all that, which are easier to secure from a funding grant perspective. So I wonder, Director Lefebvre, I say that because you are already in director for the city, do you think that is an approach that we could take?
Certainly. As a matter of fact, I believe that Electoral Area Director Fell,
Yes.
you've been talking to him, and I know he's been talking to me about it. And I gather we're going to see you at the RDN board meeting tomorrow night, or?
I don't believe so, no. I was talking with, I talked to Julian earlier in the week, and he didn't mention that to us, so. I
would suggest that that when you do come to the RDN, that you have a drop dead figure. I mean, something that something as a bare minimum, whether it's 15 or whether it's 20, and then it will give us something to work from there.
Right.
Okay.
Just to add I'm afraid the reason I don't say 15,468, which was the number last year, but that was because we didn't have to buy propane. This year, the propane truck came after the budget, so now it's going to be 17,000. So so whatever. If we need to have a figure, we can certainly provide something like that. So it's kind of a moving target for us, but certainly that's, yeah. And it's in that ballpark, certainly. There are now, haven't seen any recently, but there are a number of search and rescue groups that have entered into this sort of agreement with their regional districts or with their municipalities. I honestly don't have any I can present you with, but we could dig up something like that if that came to that.
Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Just two other further suggestions. You mentioned over 12,000 hours of training, and
sorry, just to interrupt you. That was 245 calls and 12,687 hours of actual tasks.
Okay.
Training we put in this year. We've already put in over 4,000 hours in training, and that was because of that GSAR course we ran at the beginning of the year. Last year we put in just over 3,000 hours in training.
And the total number of volunteers is?
It's the total number of volunteers. After putting through this GSAR course, I believe we're at 47. Now, I'm not 100% on that, but that was the last I looked, was 47.
Okay. Those are good statistics to have.
So, gentlemen, I think that's probably the best approach. You could certainly, ask us for a one-time grant, and I suspect you might even get it with my colleagues here because of the work that you do. But I don't think you want to have to come back every year for that. I think, first off, this would be the approach to see if we can get a line item in a budget that would secure at least that base amount, whatever that needs to be, and then we can go from there in terms of expansion. But council supportive of our director pressing for that at the regional board on our behalf? Anyone not supportive? All right, so I think you can see that we're supportive, and we'll leave it with Director Lefebvre to welcome you with open arms when you get in front of the regional district there, and hopefully we can do something similar to what was done in the past with community policing.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate everything you're doing to help us.
Yeah, thank you very much, gentlemen. Keep up the great work. I know you just had a successful outcome very recently here.
Yeah.
I've been reading about you.
We've been busy there. We were basically searching nonstop from last week and a half. So
yeah, no, it's important that people recognize and understand the amount of work that goes into it, and just how happy we would be to see you in the wrong circumstances one day. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move to our second delegation this evening, and this is from a Mr. David Douglas. Are you here, sir? I thought that might be you. And you're here to provide us with an introduction of Oceanside Classical Concerts. So by all means, sir, you probably heard my earlier comments. Generally 10 minutes, the microphone's on, and the floor is yours.
Worship Mayor Berger, council members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to address this meeting tonight.
Maybe just, sorry to interrupt, turn that microphone a little bit your way. Perfect.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to address this meeting tonight. My name is David Douglas, and I am the chairman and artistic director of Oceanside Classical Concerts. and I bring good news for all fans of classical music. Exciting developments for this fall are underway in the Parksville-Qualicum Beach area. Oceanside Classical Concerts, operating under the wing of the Oceanside Community Arts Council, with the underwritten support of our visionary partner, Beach Club Resort, is set to bring an all-classical concert series beginning in October. Oceanside Classical Concerts plans to present a minimum of 3 concerts over the 2014-15 winter and fall seasons. Fall and winter seasons. The series will feature Canadian artists of international stature. This is a subscription-only series with no individual ticket sales, is modeled after a very successful concert series developed in similar-sized communities in Canada. The architect of these concert series was Mr. George Zuckerman, Order of Canada, Order of British Columbia. And we're indeed fortunate to have his assistance in launching this effort as artistic advisor to the Oceanside Classical Concerts. We have launched our July subscription campaign now, and on the 17th of this month, and is presently underway. The concert venue will be the Knox United Church with super parking and accessibility, great acoustics, and comfortable seating. Oceanside Classical Concerts, our mission statement is we believe that classical music is an essential element in the cultural life of the Oceanside area. Oceanside Classical Concerts is committed to changing lives through music's extraordinary power to communicate, inspire, uplift, and entertain. We celebrate artistic excellence in classical music through 1, live performance of the world's great masterpieces, 2, promotion of Canadian artists of international stature, 3, a series subscription model without individual ticket sales. Tickets are not sold for individual concerts, and this is done so as to have a predictable income that allows us to book the best talent available. It also means that our volunteers have a major campaign blitz before the season begins without the overhead of a box office. Even more importantly, it gives the subscribers a carefully crafted concert experience over the entire series. The subscription is transferable in the event of changing plans or sickness. The cost of the subscription for this 2014-15 season is $95. That's 3 concerts and less than $33 per concert. Our contact information is in the handouts that I have here, and I can answer any questions that you may have. And I hope you will all come and enjoy this series and support classical music in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I will open the floor to any questions or comments from Council. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And thanks very much, David, for joining us this evening. You and I both attended the inaugural session on Thursday night, which was quite successful, and it was really quite enjoyable. I see a number of things that will be happening, and I really do appreciate what you're doing, and we have the support of Tosh and Vivian Sears, and they are looking forward to all of the increase in the concerts and availability within Oceanside. I think this is a marvelous situation, and Manley Lafoy was at the session on Thursday, and he was the one who designed the Knox. And I think it's exemplary that the Knox is being used, and it has great acoustics and great sight lines and that type of thing. So yes. I think it's going to work extremely well. I congratulate you on going forward, and just to reiterate, the tickets, although they're a subscription series of $95, the tickets are in fact transferable, so that people can split the cost of it, if you will. And I think that's important as far as the subscription series, so that you do know what the money is that you're going to have in the bank at the beginning of the year. So I would just say absolutely tremendous. And I think the best part of the whole evening actually was George Zuckerman. Very eloquent, interesting individual, and he has got a great model. And I think this is going to be extremely successful.
A huge chain of successes over the years dating back to the 1950s. So, yeah,
thank you very much.
Man. Thank you.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Douglas, for your presentation. I'm curious about the $95 per person for the required to purchase for all 3 presentations. Yeah, there's no thought given to one-off for different concerts and that sort of thing, or is that totally out of the question?
Yes, the success of George Zuckerman's series is definitely not individual ticket sales you know, I think it may be something that we may look at in the future, but just to get up and running, I think we need to have to know exactly where we are as far as what we can do. Even though we are underwritten by the Beach Club Resort, we certainly don't want to get into that. If we can avoid that, we want to get to up and running and be self-sufficient. And I think the way to assure that we do that is to maintain the model, at least for this year. And then in the future, we may explore other options because of the, you know, if you look back through the time that this series was developed, things have changed as far as online availability of ticket sales. That can be done without the overhead of a box office. But right now in this community, we feel that it's a fairly, Qualicum Beach and the whole Oceanside area is demographic is fairly elderly, and they're not using computers, and we were targeting you know, a lot of those folks that have the time and availability to join us for those kind of concerts.
Follow up, Your Worship. I don't know if it's a good analogy or a bad one, but I can remember buying season tickets for baseball. When I was in Ottawa, the Ottawa Lynx had a baseball team. I think it was AA. And what I was able to do with other colleagues was to make sure that the tickets all got used. I suppose they could do the same thing if somebody bought all 3 tickets and found out that on November 21st they were going to be away. They could. There is no ticket. You get a card when you subscribe to the series, and so you have that card, but it is transferable. So if you have somebody that you wish to gift a concert to, you're not available to attend, then the whole idea, and we encourage that because that will allow people to come and have the experience, and then hopefully next year we'll see them buying a subscription.
Any other members of council? Any questions, comments? Well, thank you, Mr. Douglas, for continuing to enrich our arts and culture scene here, which is important, and thank you for updating us on this concert series. I think it's going to be quite spectacular. It sounds like it already has been, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving into our 3rd and final delegation this evening, and this is from Tourism Vancouver Island, and it looks to me like it's Ms. Jody Young. And you're going to be providing us with a update and some background on your Trails Strategy project. And I see you have a PowerPoint that you wish to set up. Almost like you've done this sort of thing before. I have it right in front, and of course on the big screen as well, so we can follow along with you. Just want to make sure that button's pushed there. Yes, please. All right, it's all yours.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor Berger and councillors. My name is Jody Young, and I'm the Industry and Community Services Manager with Tourism Vancouver Island. Tonight I'm here to talk to you about a multi-phase trails strategy for the Vancouver Island region. Tourism Vancouver Island was successful applicants to the Island Coastal Economic Trust's Economic Development Readiness Program to undergo this project. To proceed with the first phase of the 3-phase project, we are seeking financial support of $2,500 from communities, municipalities, and regional districts within the region. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Tourism Vancouver Island is and why it's fitting that we're undertaking this project, an overview of the Vancouver Island Trails strategy and project concept, a few statistics on how important trails are to our region, and then we'll focus in on phase 1 of the project where we're seeking financial support. So first and foremost, who Tourism Vancouver Island is. So we're one of 6 regional destination marketing organizations in the province of British Columbia. We're a not-for-profit association contracted by Destination British Columbia to deliver marketing services specific to promoting the Vancouver Island region. Our mission is to increase the economic benefits that flow from tourism to the region, and our vision is the Vancouver Island region will be internationally recognized as a preferred travel and getaway destination. And we do operate on the stakeholder model, so we're not a member model. That means we embrace all tourism industry participants in the region. And yeah, we don't charge a membership fee to work with us. It's just pay-to-play programs. Okay, so moving right into the Vancouver Island Trails strategy and an overview of the project. So the Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast regions have incredible assets in trails, as we all know. We're already on the map boasting world-class trails such as the West Coast Trail, the Sunshine Coast Trail, and the North Coast Trail. Visitors are attracted to our regions for the purposes of hiking these trails. And these trails see thousands of hikers each year. We found that currently there's not one single resource that hosts all the information on trails for the Vancouver Island region. So we see this as an opportunity to create an all-encompassing resource of our top marketable trails. We can then more actively use trails to increase visitors to the region, as well as attract resident and workforce attraction. There are several like-minded organizations and agencies devoted to the development and maintenance of various multi-use trail systems, but they lack the resources for trail interpretation, consistent mapping, signage, and most importantly, the marketing and promotion of the use of the trails. Further to this, there are numerous agencies that are invested in some form of trails development and promotion. However, we see the opportunity for alignment to take place between these agencies. Better alignment of collective work in the region would reduce duplication and eliminate any gaps that exist. If we all focused on the common goals surrounding trails and trail usage within our region, we'd be better positioned for prosperity. So next I'm going to provide a few statistics around hiking trail usage in terms of our residents and visitors. So here on the screen, we've got the Tourism Vancouver Island, the Vancouver Island Resident Survey. So Tourism Vancouver Island conducted a resident survey in 2013. The research looked at how Vancouver Island residents perceive tourism-related products and services in relation to their quality of life here on the island. So what we found was that 81% of Vancouver Island residents see space to access the outdoors, such as parks, trails, picnic areas, and beach access, as significant to their quality of life. Secondly, what we found was that 72% of Vancouver Island residents think space to access the outdoors, such as parks, trails, picnic areas, and beach access, were contributed to significantly by the tourism industry within the region. So with the second question, what we were trying to determine was if residents saw the connection between the amenities available, such as hiking trails, and the tourism industry, and they did. So in other words, would there be as many hiking trails if there weren't the tourists to support them as well? The second piece of research here that we'll look at, so this is the 2012 in-market research. So this research was conducted by Destination British Columbia between November 2011 and April 2012. The survey was administered electronically, and it surveyed over 700 visitors to the region. Most of the respondents were from Western Washington, Alberta, and the lower mainland of British Columbia. So before we look at that, I'll just highlight that the key activities which motivated trips to Vancouver Island were sightseeing, nature, wildlife viewing, and visiting friends or relatives. So that's what motivated visitors to the region. And then when you look at what we found, at what Destination British Columbia found, so the top activities which visitors participated in once they got to the region was sightseeing, nature, wildlife viewing, visiting national or provincial parks, hiking, biking, other outdoor recreation activities. So there's these are all in the top activities which visitors are participating in once they're here in our region. So it's all very related to the outdoors and trails. So moving into the Vancouver Island Trails project concept. So it is a 3-phase project. On the next couple of slides, I'll go into more detail on phase 1, but essentially phase 1 is research and inventory. Phase 2 will be taking the information that we find in phase 1 and developing a trails strategy dependent on that information, all the details that we find in phase 1. And then phase 3 will be implementation of the trails strategy. So that's where the potential outputs will be developed, the marketing collateral, possible upgrades to trails, or upgrades or development of consistent signage, etc., things like that. That'll depend, the implementation piece will really depend on what we find in phase 1 and then what's developed in the strategy. So a little bit more detail on phase 1. So here's where we're seeking the financial support. So in phase 1, we'll be conducting an RFP process to hire a contractor to complete the research and inventory that we want to gain in this phase. The contractor will develop an inventory that will be a searchable database of the highest potential marketable hiking trails. Some of the key attributes that the contractor will be looking at and defining in the database will be trail type, condition, length, location, development needs, mapping requirements, accessibility, level and/or degree of difficulty, signage, and best practices, just to name a few. The activities that the contractor will complete in Phase 1 will be to establish a consultation process with communities that are actively engaged in trails. So this way we'll know what is already occurring throughout the region in terms of trail development and promotion, so we can look for opportunities and aim to eliminate any gaps. The inventory will include research that identifies active agencies involved in trail development activities. So this would be the hiking groups, hiking clubs, and trail users. We'll then take those two groups identified and engage in dialogue regarding shared approaches for moving forward. And again, building this comprehensive inventory so we can look at what's missing from our trails to make them more marketable to our visitors. So lastly, in terms of support, so we've confirmed support from the Island Coast Economic Trust. We've been actively engaged with Recreation Sites and Trails Branch throughout the process, and we have confirmation of support from them as well. And we've began discussions with Vancouver Island regional districts, municipalities, and communities over the past few weeks. So lastly, I'd like to thank you all for your time and allowing me to present to you this evening on the Vancouver Island Trails strategy, and to respectfully request your financial support of $2,500 towards the Vancouver Island Hiking Trails project. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So once again, I'll open the floor up to members of council. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm trying to understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, because there's the ENN Trail, there's the Trans-Canada Trail, and there's the Vista Trail, and I sit on the regional district board. There's all kinds of regional district trails, and there are provincial park trails. So is your intention to sort of inventory all of that also? Because these are things that are ongoing, and we're contributing money to them. Not only the RDN, but the city of Parksville. So how does? I guess what I'm struggling with is how does this seems to be other trails that I haven't mentioned that are being that haven't been inventoried or haven't been rated for difficulty, level of difficulty, and things like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So what we'd have the contractor do would be to go out and do this inventory and collect all that data, and it's likely that it already all exists, but it's getting it into one database. And then from that, we determine kind of what the top 100 marketable trails would be to visitors. And so it could be kind of like a more of an attraction, drawing more visitors to the region for the reason of purpose of hiking trails.
Follow up, Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
The RDN, for example, they have a complete booklet listing of all their trails, levels of difficulty, and all of these things that are what are you can't camp overnight in certain ones, and others are accessible, and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm struggling with is when you decided to do this with Ice-T, did you consult with the regional districts, and did you consult with for example, the folk that are going to be doing the Trans-Canada Trail and the ENN Trail and the Vista Trail, that you were going to do this and get from them? Are they agreeable to give you that information and so forth and so on?
Yeah, we did have lots of letters of support in order to take the proposal to the Island Coast Economic Trust in the beginning. So and again, it's more of the Spine Trail, for instance. They have a bit of a different mandate. Like theirs is more to develop that trail, and ours is more like the marketing and promotion. So taking all that information and turning it into something that's similar, because it's kind of done differently in all of the different districts, and trying to bring it all together into one product so that it's easy to read. And again, we don't quite know what it's going to look like because it's gathering all that information first and seeing where the differences are.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I'll go to my colleagues. But, so if I understand this correctly, then I'm from Saskatchewan. I decide I want a vacation focused on hiking and whatnot. If this has all been done correctly in the way that you envision, I go to the web, I type in fantastic hiking trails, boom, pops up a site that's for all of Vancouver Island. Sunshine Coast, I believe, is included.
Yeah, and we'd include
that
Sunshine
says,
Coast.
we're a major trail destination. These are our fantastic assets that may be of interest to you, right?
Yeah, and again, it's all going to depend on the development of the trail strategy, what that's going to look like. But that's our end goal, is to have these great pieces that'll that'll attract visitors to a region, and that they can find that information more readily available in an easy-to-read format that's consistent throughout the whole region.
Yeah, and I do know of some areas in the world which are quite famous for their trails, and they do draw a lot of tourists for that purpose alone. Okay. Councillor Neufeld, you had your hand up.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thanks very much, Jody, for making the presentation. It's something that's fascinating to me as far as tourism is concerned. I think this is a wonderful idea, but really what you're talking about is you're talking about marketing. You're talking about economic development here. This is really not about trails. Trails happen to be the conduit of bringing more development into the area. Because as Councillor Lefebvre has said, much of this data is already out there. It's already being collected. It's already being worked with. What exactly is going to be your point of departure of what you're going to do? How are you going to do it? And for $2,500, how many other sponsors have you got? And where are we going to be going with this? Because I can see the benefit to it, but in fact, now you can go to the internet and find out where you want to be. Now, it would be great to be able to connect all of that data and know that you could actually take a bike and go from Cowichan to Vancouver, or Victoria, I should say, and that type of thing. But that is slowly being phased in. That's being put together, and it would be great to be able to have bed and breakfast and other entertainment and everything else on the way. But that's being done. At least I see it being done. Maybe not as quickly as you would like to see, but what exactly are you going to be contributing to this process? Could you please tell me?
Okay, so I think I heard a few questions there. So in total, we're trying to get 15 communities or regional districts, because we've got the $30,000 from the Island Coast Economic Trust, and then we'd need another 15 partners to make up our total budget for the first phase. And then the second phase, we'd be going back to the Island Coast Economic Trust as well. And then the third phase, we're planning on it being a much larger phase where it might be that we're developing consistent signage throughout the region. So that phase, we'd be looking at going to the Western diversification for a larger amount of funds there. In terms of the internet, so there is that information in different areas, but it's really about trying to bring it all together into one area so that consumers out there in the world know that they're going to this one site for the information, and it's so that they can, because it's different information that's available on the site, so we want to have on there like what the condition is of the trail, the accessibility, the degree, the level of rating, and have it consistent throughout the region, because what we've found right now that it is varying, it is different, and it's lacking in some areas. And did that answer all of your questions? Okay.
One more, and then I see Councillor Lefebvre.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Just to follow up. So you're going to be coming back to us for more money, what I was hearing there. How much more money? What are we looking at? What are we coming right down to? It's $2,500 today, and you've got 14 or 15 municipalities. What are we looking at, and what is the time frame that we're actually dealing with here, please?
I don't think that we'd be coming back to the municipalities and the cities for the second and third phase. That's where we'd start going to, in the second phase, we'd start going to the tours at the destination marketing organizations once we get into the marketing tactics.
Okay, I'm just going to let Councillor Morrison jump in, then Councillor Lefebvre had his hand up earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Just following along the same vein a little bit, so you've asked for $2,500 for each. Get that right, that you haven't actually done a request for proposal yet, or you have done, and that's where you're getting your baseline for your costs from? Or?
We haven't sent out the RFP to hire the contractor. We've just got the confirmation of support of the project from the Island Coast Economic Trust. And then we've got it from the Recreation Sites and Trails of BC. We've got support from them. So we're trying to make up that missing piece before we send out the RFP. We're trying to get confirmation of the funds before we move forward with that, yes.
Right. The only reason I asked is that it's hard to gauge a budget when you don't have a proposal of gathering that information. So when you get your proposals, there'll obviously be a bunch of different costs involved, and different people have different budgets in mind. to me, it would make more sense to get those first and then come to the cities to make sure that you can cover your costs.
In the first, yeah. What we're going to say, like, this is the budget to get to complete the project, and we did do some consulting before we built the budget as well, to ask some contractors and consultants that could do this type of work what kind of budget range we're working with. So that's how we came up with the budget, sort of on the flip side.
All right, Councillor Lefebvre. I think we're going to have to wrap this up fairly soon.
Okay, I've listened to you answer Councillor Neufeld and Councillor Morrison's questions and my questions. Is it accurate to say that what Tourism Vancouver Island wants to do is market all of the trails on Vancouver Island? Is that the objective?
Not all of them. We want to find the top 100 marketable trails. So the most user-friendly, the top 100 that would attract visitors to the region.
So, but you realize that there's going to be some overlap, because some of these trails are going to be marketed by these other organizations that I've mentioned. For example, the ENN Trail, the Trans-Canada Trail, because there's people actively working and spending money on it now. And as I said, we're contributing money through the RDN and other organizations for these trails. So I'm still confused about, where you're going to go with this, and what are you going to do about overlap? That's my big concern, because there are booklets as we speak. The RDN has booklets regarding the trails that they have. I mentioned that earlier. So it's probably there's probably going to be some overlap, and there's probably going to be some confusion unless you get a mandate from some of these groups to sort of make your website the hub that everybody wants to go to.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, definitely there'll be, like, some of the trails are already being marketed, some aren't. But that's really what we're hoping to find in phase one, is what is going on already out there, and taking that and building it into the strategy. We've been looking at some other successful trails strategy models in British Columbia, in Canada, in the world as well. And this has been successfully done. One of the models that we're looking at is in the shoe swap, and trying to kind of mimic some of the work that they've done. So, and I guess if they are obviously some of the trails are already being marketed, so it'd be developing consistent messaging so that it's just getting out there further.
All right, Ms. Young, thank you for that presentation. That was fun, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I quite enjoyed it. Nonetheless, I presume you're going to be speaking to our regional district as well, and others in your process here?
Yeah, so we have been to the regional district of Nanaimo as well.
Okay, what was the reception there? Was it as fun and warm as this one?
I think it was quite good.
It was good? Okay. All right, well, that's no reflection on yourself. I think you've done very well. Nonetheless, I think you're probably getting a sense that there's still a lot of questions, and maybe it's a little early to get a clear understanding of the picture, and it's a huge task that you're undertaking. Yeah. Although I get it. I think I understand exactly what you're trying to do. In a sense, it's almost like a branding exercise on our best and greatest trails. But nonetheless, we'll take it under advisement. Okay. And
would it help if I forwarded a little bit more information?
Yes.
Okay, I can do that too.
New information is always great, so please do, and that'll alert us to at least continue to think on this, and perhaps there is a way that we can support you in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving into the reports section of tonight's meeting, and the first up is Mr. Figuera, our engineer, and could you please give us the background with respect to the Temple Street upgrades, Phase 1 project?
If I may, Your Worship, in front of Council is the construction contract award and the professional services during construction award for Phase 1 of the Temple Street upgrades project. The work covers construction of roads, sewers, drainage, water, street lighting, and bicycle lanes for approximately 1 kilometer section of Temple Street, stretching from 60 meters west of Phillips Street to Chinook Avenue. I'd like to point out a correction to the report. In the executive summary, the second paragraph, last sentence, it indicates the Phase 1 total project cost is 4% below the total identified 2014 budget amount. That's not correct. As a matter of fact, we're asking for a little bit of extra funding for this phase. The additional funding totaling approximately $373,000 is being asked for. $200,000 of this is a contingency amount that could only be accessed upon approval by myself. The additional funding is available from the General and Water Fund capital reserves and General Fund accumulated surplus. The bid prices received were competitive and are considered market value for this work. The recommendation is as per the report.
Okay, Council, so we have a 7-part recommendation before you. I'm not going to read out all 7 parts. Do we have anyone prepared to move the entirety of that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell, and discussion on the now motion. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. The ghost of Councillor Greer is hovering around the table tonight, and I feel that on his behalf I'll ask this question. At the last paragraph on the bottom of page 3 of page 6, you talk about the proposed that the shortfall be funded partly by the General and Water Fund's capital reserve and the General Fund accumulated surplus. Capital reserve doesn't have enough to fund shortfall. Are we dipping into, in the interest of fiscal responsibility, are we putting ourselves in any kind of a position where we're going to deplete earlier than we should any one of these 2 funds, or is it all going to be affordable and fundable from the upcoming revenues and things like that?
Mr. Figuera.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre. I think it's important to keep in mind, too, the contingency amount there. We certainly try to be very frugal with that. If that is, if you take that out, we're talking about $173,000, and I noticed the estimate we recently got. We're asking for $45,000 for geotechnical services. We've actually been able to weed that down to about $16,000. So there's another $30,000 that we won't be likely requiring at this time. So that basically gets it down to about $150,000, which is within about 5%. And for that amount of money, I don't know if my colleague can speak to the overall effect of that figure on the budget.
Well, why don't we have your colleague speak to the overall effect of that figure on the budget? Mr. Butterworth, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Councillor. The water capital reserve, the capital reserves are there. We haven't used them in a number of years. They've just sort of been sitting there. And they're there for this type of situation where a project goes over and we have the capital reserve so we can use that to fund it. In previous years when we've had surpluses in the capital fund or in the capital for the year and haven't used all the monies, we've just been leaving them in accumulated surplus. The capital reserves are an old under our old fund accounting. We had capital funds. They're coming from that, and we don't use those anymore, the capital funds. So they're just sort of sitting there as a reserve. So I thought this would be a good time to use them. So in the shortage in the water fund for this project, there is enough money in the water capital reserve to cover that portion of it. And in the general fund, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's in the $130,000 range in the general capital reserve. So that could all be used if necessary, and it's going to leave us still short an extra $100,000 to $150,000, which would come out of accumulated surplus. That in our 5-year plan is not going to cause any great strain in our 5-year plan right at this particular point in time. And again, that's only if the whole contingency is used of $200,000. If it isn't used or very little of it's used, then this should be able to be funded just from the capital reserves.
Okay, so we're clear? Essentially, and just for the benefit of those in the audience that may not be all that familiar with how these things work, but if I'm understanding it correctly, or early on in a very early stage estimate, we must have been a little light in terms of our budgeting. Ultimately, that's left us with this small shortfall. But I also note in your report, we've had a very competitive process, which is fantastic. So we know we're getting good bang for our buck in light of that competition. And it was, I think, pleasantly a little under where we thought it might fall out ultimately before that process began. So, I mean, that's a positive as well. But essentially what our Director of Finance has said, in effect, is that assuming, and we do like to assume the worst here, so forgive us, but we always do, hope for the best, assuming the worst, that there'd be a small amount out of the general fund that's not going to be that impactful on our overall financial plan, and that if we have a better case scenario or contingencies ultimately coming through without having been spent, then it's just capital reserve dollars that we'd be funding it. So, all right, now Councillor Neufeld, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sorry, gentlemen, I'm going to have to abstain from this because, in fact, I have yet to see that report. I don't know where, it seems that everyone else has got it, but I have not received one. And I look at it, and I've been listening to what is occurring, and I don't know of what we're speaking. You know, it was to be distributed, and it is not available.
Okay, I have a copy here for you, although I realize that's very late in date. I can certainly provide it to you. Was it in your mail slot?
It wasn't in my mailbox on Friday. It wasn't in my mailbox that I have looked at it.
Okay, you didn't receive the... Okay. All right. You can't abstain from a vote here, unfortunately. You can vote in favor or opposed, obviously. If you don't indicate a vote, that's considered a vote in favor. But here, I'll pass you this report for the time being. Okay, so other members of council, are there any questions of our Director of Engineering or even our Director of Finance, since we've gotten them on board here? Okay, are you confident then with the bids that have been provided that the low bidder, as your recommendation, is capable of this work? I know we've had some work with them in the past and it seems to have gone very well. And that's to Mr. Figueroa.
If I may, Your Worship, all indications are that they are capable of doing this work.
All right, very good. Are we ready to call it? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to the next report, and this is from our Acting Director of Community Planning. Ms. Keeler, can you give us the background with respect to Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 371 Alberni Highway?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a follow-up report on Zoning and Development Bylaw Amendment application from Michelle Jones of Timberlake Jones Engineering on behalf of the property owners Kellen Foods Holdings for a portion of the above-mentioned property at 371 Alberni Highway. And the application is to receive the information and follow the recommendation as per the agenda.
All right, so fairly straightforward recommendation there. We'll obviously be dealing with this a little later under bylaws, and I'm looking for a mover and a second. Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Any discussion? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just reading the comments from the people in the area, and since this was first come to council, we've got the responses from the open house that the proponent had, and there are concerns about traffic safety because we've changed the schools now. And so is that going to be dealt with at a later date? I know that we did receive, when it was questioned to staff, we did receive the previous traffic study report, and I'm just wondering if that's good enough.
Ms. Keeler, did you want to touch on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Powell. The application was submitted before the school district's announcements to change that particular school at Springwood to an elementary school. And so the traffic impact analysis doesn't address specifically the pedestrian issues of a smaller age group. Based on some of the comments that were submitted at the public open house, the traffic engineer did provide some confirmation of their analysis regarding the delay that's expected at the Molliette intersection, but there has not been any specific mitigative measures targeted on the younger folks that may be in the area.
Follow on?
Thank you, Your Worship. So is there going to be an opportunity for, before this comes to the public hearing, for this to go back to the proponent and look at that issue and taking into consideration the younger age group?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, through you. Yes, that's certainly something Council could request at this time. We have not, when our engineering department reviewed the information, again, it was prior to the school district's announcement, so we have not specifically asked for any update or different information from the traffic engineer in that regard.
Well, we do have a motion on the floor right now. If that is something you wish to do, then I suspect you need to vote against this motion and then set new direction for the applicant. This motion would essentially set it up for a public hearing date once we get to the bylaw section. If it fails, yeah. I don't know. Other members of council, any comments, questions? Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship, and I wanted to thank the Acting Director of Community Planning for sending us the letter from the Bunt and Associates on the traffic issues that we talked about a number of weeks ago. I guess in rereading the letter on a number of occasions, the final paragraph indicates to me that it starts off by saying, if more information is needed, we recommend that an updated traffic counts be conducted at this intersection to determine actual demand conditions rather than relying on the predicted forecast traffic volumes from the 2013 Binney report. This would give us a more accurate baseline traffic conditions and allow us to reconfirm our analysis with the Quality Foods store open. So I guess it's probably something that will be done after the Quality Food store would be open, that this could be re-looked at in terms of volume and issues of traffic gridlock or whatever the case may be, or pedestrian issues. So I suppose everything else seems to indicate that it seems to be fairly copacetic, but the final paragraph does say that there could be other things looked at if and when the time comes when the schools are in session and the store is fully operational. So I guess I can live with that as long as there's an understanding that would have to be done at some point in time, because I still have some concern.
Well, I think that if we move this forward to a public hearing, and we do receive a lot of comment at that public hearing, that could inform council's further decisions on this matter at that point. So it would provide us an opportunity, if we're really concerned, to come back at this. I see Mr. Manson was moving his microphone. Did you need to speak, or are you good?
If I may, Your Worship, you basically said what I was going to suggest to council is the public hearing does give an opportunity for additional comments and concerns to be brought forward to council. And from that, if additional things have to be addressed, it is council's prerogative to have those addressed before it goes to final adoption.
It's awesome we can finish each other's sentences for us, isn't it? Okay, so you do have a motion now on the floor. Council, are there any further comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. All right, Mrs. Keeler, let's continue on our roll, shall we? And this is item C, and this is regarding regulation of farm uses.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a response to a resolution that was passed by Council in September of 2013, and this basically provides an overview of the implications of regulating agricultural use on ALR lands. Council requested that staff investigate the implications, and the recommendation is per your agenda.
So we simply have a motion to receive at this time. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Neufeld, seconded by Councillor Morrison. So on the motion and on the report, is there any comments from council? Councillor Neufeld.
Given the limited amount of transactions that have been done as far as farm bylaws, I don't see any point in going forward with this, particularly with the amount of expense that would be involved, and the possibility that the ministry would in fact be turning it down anyway. Until we have some further information as to how we might proceed at a less costly way, I would accept the recommendation and go forward with that recommendation and just call it a day.
All right, thank you. I have a question, Mrs. Keeler. I did have some folks come to me some time ago during one of our coffee sessions with some concerns specific to one farming property in the city and some plans to bring a new function to that farm. This would be marijuana growing. And I wonder to what extent could a farm use bylaw, if one were implemented, regulate that kind of an activity on an already established farm in the AOR?
So the marijuana is also federally regulated, and so given the governance regime that we find ourselves in, we can't do anything that would frustrate the federal interest. So we wouldn't be able to be more restrictive, likely, than what the federal regulations already say. Historically, over time, when agricultural uses have developed, what they call farm normal practices are established through the Farm Protection Practices Board. It hasn't been around long enough, I don't think, for those kinds of rules to have been formulated. But the federal regulations do state that it must be within a building. So we know that we can create some setbacks. But if we were to be doing something that essentially prohibited or overly regulated that use, we would probably be getting a talking to from the federal government that we're frustrating their interest. The other thing would be that we would probably need a farm bylaw to be more restrictive than the 30-meter setback. The minister's standard bylaws really have setbacks ranging from 5 to 30 meters. And 30 meters is from very significant water courses or environmental features. And if we were to go beyond 30, we probably would need some kind of provincial and probably even federal approval. So at this point, given that we do have one underway, perhaps, if the federal licensing comes through, we probably would have to work very closely with them and see if the federal government would be willing to either take that on themselves and impose regulations, or give us some advice as to how far we could actually go without so-called frustrating their interests. That's the word they use in the legal speak.
All right, so quite an undertaking, essentially, in order to do that. Very good. All right, any other members of council have any questions, comments? All right, so we have a motion to receive. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. All right, so now we move to our Director of Finance. This is item D, and it's a background with respect to a reduction to approved borrowing for Parsifal Civic and Technology Center. Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a report, or in 1999, the city approved a loan authorization bylaw for $6 million relating to the development of the PCTC lands, including the construction of the PCTC building. The city only needed to borrow $1,815,000 because the lands next to the PCTC property were sold, and those sale proceeds were used to finance the remainder of the PCTC building construction. The unused borrowing of almost $4.2 million remains tied up as the borrowing capacity of the city is reduced by any borrowing bylaws outstanding, regardless of whether we actually used all the borrowing approved by the bylaw. So the city's borrowing capacity can be increased by reducing the amount of the borrowing established in the bylaw through a resolution indicating further borrowing under the bylaw will not be requested. So the recommendation and proposed resolution is as per the agenda.
All right, so we do have that recommendation before us. We have a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Powell. And any discussion? Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I think I've seen somewhere in here where there's a borrowing capacity at the present time of approximately $50 million. I mean, that's a significant amount of money. How much money actually do we have borrowed at the present time? And what is the nature of the requirement for the increased borrowing capacity, if you will, sir?
Mr. Butterworth.
May Your Worship, through to Councillor Neufeld. Our current borrowing, I believe, is around $2.3 million. The majority of that relates to the Arrowsmith Water Service Dam. The rest of it relates to the remainder of the $1.8 million, which is now under $1 million left. The increasing the borrowing capacity, or this $4 million, there's no intention to use it. It's just it actually ties up the borrowing capacity province-wide. If every municipality had $4 million unused borrowing on their books, then that would total up to around $500 million plus, and that does affect the borrowing rates that the Municipal Finance Authority can negotiate.
Follow-up, Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So this is actually more a benefit to the MFA as far as their overall borring capacity rather than our borrowing capacity. It opens up something else for, say, Cowichan or Kamloops or whatever to draw on at a better borrowing rate than is presently stated. Is this what you're saying?
Go ahead, Mr. Butterworth.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Every municipality has a set amount that they can borrow based on their reserves that they have, and this wouldn't affect any other municipality. This is really just to increase our borrowing capacity, and again, it does affect the rates. The MFA has a consistent rate for every municipality. There's not different rates for different municipalities, so if we need to borrow in the future, which we are going to be needing to borrow in the future, and the MFA can get a better rate because everybody's gone through and cleaned up their borrowing bylaws, then we would benefit from that, as would every other municipality as well. This $4 million in itself isn't going to do anything, but if every municipality cleans up their books, then maybe it would make a difference.
Follow-up, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I guess I look at it and I ask the question then, given that we've had many years of surpluses, we've never defaulted on a payment to my knowledge. We've been described as having good bones as far as infrastructure. There is, what's the issue as far as, reducing the borrowing? And we have, untold millions of dollars of borrowing capacity, well beyond what we're going to need for the water treatment plant and everything else. And at the present time, we have a low cost as far as the MFA is concerned. And I'm just wondering, I don't understand what the impetus as far as bringing this forward at this time. Could you, in fact, enlighten me in this manner?
So speak to the second portion of the recommendation, Mr. Butterworth, which is actually saying, in effect, that this borrowing bylaw is no longer required in the amount of $4 million, which, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, if I can. And actually, the impetus to bring this forward is just a letter from the MFA that we had received a little while back, informing us that we had this extra borrowing capacity and that we could increase the city's borrowing capacity by removing that from the books, and they explained the process, and recently I went through with them, dealing with them, and figured out exactly how the process had to do it in order to do it, and so that's really what was driving it, is just a letter from the MFA informing us that it's in everybody's benefit to reduce these excess borrowings.
Mr. Manson, you wish to speak.
If I may, Your Worship, in addition, in essence, this is a housekeeping item to clean up old, unused debt that the city will never be using.
Kind of like when I chop my extra credit cards up because I was never going to use them, and it sits on my credit report as excess debt because it's just the amount that's there, whether I borrow against it or not is irrelevant, right? All right, very good. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment. I would think that I commend staff for doing this, because I would imagine that when the Municipal Auditor General starts visiting, and they've already starts visiting communities and municipalities around the province, this is one of the things that they're probably going to look at, and we better have our house.
essentially the tail end of a success story, which I won't get into tonight, but we did very well with this facility as a result, actually, of some of the good work of Mr. Manson over there, but I'm not going to give him any more credit than that for now. Sorry. But this is good that we don't need to have this authorization bylaw anymore. Just taking me back a few years. So, if there are no further comments on the motion, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to item E now. Mrs. Comas, can you give us the background with respect to unsightly properties 170 and 192 Jensen Avenue and 225 Corfield Street?
Yes, Your Worship. The city has received complaints about these two properties. The owner is a chronic offender. We've had the same complaints for 5 out of the last 6 years, and the recommendations are as per the council agenda.
So we do have a recommendation there, and I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item, of course, was removed from the agenda as those properties have been brought into compliance, and we're now moving into the bylaw section of tonight's meeting. Item A, which is for 2 readings in advance to a public hearing. This is Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2014 number 2000.94. We have the associated recommendation there. Do we have a mover and a second? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Now moving to bylaws that we have up for 3rd reading tonight. There are 3 of these, and we do have a recommendation that groups all of those together. Do we have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Powell. And now, do we have any member of council that wishes to speak in opposition of any of those particular 3 items? Councillor Neufeld, do you want to indicate?
Actually, what I would like is clarification as far as bylaw 1509. There are a couple of reasons for that. I know that I'm going to get a call from a gentleman who has property in Parksville that's had some issue with the bylaws and land use regulations, this type of thing. It says on page 83, under sections F, G, H, the land use regulations are all going to be removed, and that's fine. The indication, though, on under H, the question that I would have is what is the impact of change of use regulation on things such as the Golden Dawn mobile home park? Has there been any consultation with Mr. Smith? And there has been some issue in the past with respect to his usage of that property as far as a mobile home park is concerned. So I'm just forestalling what I see as possibly coming up. Can you give me further information on that, please?
I can certainly pass this over to our Acting Director of Community Planning, Mrs. Keeler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Neufeld. This particular bylaw is for the area that was formerly RDN zoning only, so it doesn't affect the Golden Dawn at the end of Corfield there. That's under our own Parksville zoning bylaw. This is only the areas that were formerly known as Bylaw 500 that were annexed or taken into the city with the old RDN zone.
All right, thank you.
I don't want to be picky on this. Mr. Smith has talked to me any number of times and been quite concerned that he hasn't been able to bring up all of his I guess, the grandfathering of bylaws and this type of thing. And I haven't, maybe I've been delinquent on this, but I haven't been able to follow through on his understanding or my understanding of what has occurred. So this has nothing to do with that particular lot at all, as far as at the north end of Corfield.
No, it
Okay,
hasn't.
thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments regarding any of these three items? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Now moving on to our final adoption, of which we have two bylaws for final adoption tonight. And again, we have a recommendation that lumps those two together. Do we have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Is there any member of council that wishes to speak to any of those two items or indicate opposition to any of those two final adoptions? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, we're moving into new business, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start by asking if any member of council has any items of new business. Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I said when David Douglas was here, I'm really quite impressed with what is occurring as far as the concert series that is being put on by the Oceanside Community Arts Council. It is looking extremely good. I feel confident that it's going to be something that will improve the communication of people within the community of Oceanside, and it has brought in the people with Tosh, and they're bringing in groups that we will in fact be able to use across the ocean, across Oceanside. It is a community effort, and Mr. Zuckerman, I think, has used this model a number of times, and has done extremely well with it. He himself has completed his career as far as a player is concerned, but he is still very much involved in the music industry, and I'm very impressed with the people that showed up on Thursday night, and very impressed with what they're attempting to do, and the fact that it is by subscription only as far as $95. All of those tickets, in fact, can be split up, if you will, so that there are three people that could use the ticket, and it is a tremendous quality of life situation, providing extremely good music, and I fully endorse it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that update. Any other member of council before I go into my little bit? Okay, very good. I'm going to move to the item that you see listed there as A under new business, which is a quick verbal report on our Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve. I do have a motion that I'm going to be asking a member of council to bring forward, if you're so willing. Essentially, as you know, council, we did establish a memorandum of understanding between ourselves and the university, and I'm pleased to report that's actually going quite well. We are in the process, in an interim capacity, of transitioning out of the old structure into a not fully defined, but getting closer defined new structure. I can tell you that the university's involvement has been really shifting the whole terms of how we've been managing the biosphere, and I say that again in a positive way. I know that even in this interim period, they're already making grant applications for possible research funding. There's no shortage of opportunities within our biosphere that we can ultimately take advantage of. We should never, ever have the significance of that international designation being lost upon us again. I can also tell you that we've had some discussions with local First Nations, and as you can appreciate, as you know from recent UNESCO reports, as well as even court decisions that you're hearing about, there may have never been a time more than now to really engage with First Nations and establish new working relationships. And so one of the concepts which the Nanu's First Nation has already been very receptive to is perhaps opening up that memorandum of understanding that we signed to include them as a signatory, to establish in policy various approaches to one another in terms of how we function. And certainly the idea has evolved not only to that, but then to perhaps even develop a model that we can utilize and even export to other communities that are also engaging with some of their First Nations. long story short, it's been very, very positive to date, and although you're not hearing a whole bunch from us yet, we're not quite there yet. Things are progressing quite nicely. To that end, there is the matter of some funds that have been set aside in a bank for the old organization, and we're looking to transfer those funds on, again, an interim basis to ensure that they are held in trust and then released to the new organization when that is established. And as much as the university is taking on a lot of the stewardship of all the files and whatnot, there's apparently a whole closet full of files, I was hoping that a member of council might move the following motion, that the City of Parks will become the interim trustee for the funds belonging to the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve until such time as the new governing board is in place and able to resume governance of the reserve. And to that end, we're talking about $16,500 sitting in an account. So is there a mover of that? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Any questions, discussion? All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. It is exciting, though. I think the university involvement has really made a difference, and I get to sit in this room with people that are all smarter than me, and I'm hoping some of it rubs off. But it's just some really interesting discussions underway, and there'll be lots to discuss in the future. All right, moving on. We do have a motion that you should have in your agenda here. And this is an application to Building Canada Fund for Englishman River Water Service. As you recall, at our last meeting, we talked about doing exactly this, and we tasked staff with putting these actual applications together, which they have now done so, and seek a simple resolution from Council that Parksville City Council directs staff to make application to the new Building Canada Fund for a financial contribution toward construction of the Englishman River Water System, drinking water treatment infrastructure, and distribution system. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell. What I can tell you, Council, is there is no intake process right now. We're still waiting for our spring intake, which I think I'm being told is likely going to be in September, so I guess we'll have to call that a fall intake now. But what we're essentially doing is sending it directly to both the federal and provincial governments. I've been in almost constant communication, actually, with our MLA, so she's working very hard, to do what she can to get things in order. And you may or may not be aware, I've had a few words with our MP as of late. So nonetheless, it's time to move forward and focus on what needs to happen, and this is a one way of doing that. So, any further comments, questions from Council on this one? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Not quite, Councillor Powell. I know you're looking for that motion to adjourn, but we can't go anywhere yet. I do need, under Section 90 in special business, or pursuant to Section 91C of the Community Charter, I need a motion that Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item related to labor relations. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Morrison. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to move in camera now. Again, thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening.